All right, well, today on our podcast, we have a very esteemed and special guest, Mr. Nolan Bushnell, who has a career in the tech and gaming world that spans long before either of us were a blink in.
Yeah, you were creating stuff that my mom and dad thought was really, really, really cool, and that's pretty incredible.
Well, you know, the number of people that have told me that they met their husband or wife playing Pong is incredible.
Yeah.
So I may have actually been responsible for you.
You probably are. My mom has said that my dad was obsessed with it when they were first dating, so you very well could take credit for my existence.
I think the same, because I think the only video game my mom has ever played that she'll acknowledge, she's like, yeah, I used to play Pong when I was a kid. And that's where it starts and stops. So thank you very much for my existence, first and foremost.
And the reason we have you in here today, the reason we were so lucky to just have this work out was that in a really interesting way, gaming has now come full circle. We were 2 days ago playing a VR room-scaled version of Pong
with our bodies.
Yeah, it was.
It's a workout.
It is a workout.
Yeah, my neck was. I should have stretched before I did it.
We saw people stretching for this, and we're like, "Ha, yeah, real funny." And then the next day, I was like, "Ugh."
Yeah, I did not feel.
My
good
ankles were hurting. It's weird to think of a video game, but also a physical activity. So I wasn't fully prepared for it. So I mean, speaking of that, I don't think we really pushed it into our viewers' brains yet. But tell them exactly what you created and what you founded in the heyday of video games.
I did a game called Computer Space, which was an adaptation of a game that was shipped with every PDP-1, which was a big monster computer, $1 million, and it was the first digital computer that had a video screen attached to it.
So it wasn't just spinning wheels and lights lighting up?
Well, the traditional output in those days was a big, paper printer and line printer, and then somebody says, well, maybe there's some real-time aspects. I mean, you'd put in a deck of cards, the computer run it, and spit out a whole bunch of paper and tell you the answer to your technical problem. Boring.
Yeah, not as fun.
Not as fun. And so a guy named Steve Russell at MIT thought that he'd create this little space combat game on the unit, and I saw it when I was in engineering school and was putting myself through college working at an amusement park. And I knew the economics of the coin-operated game business. And I thought to myself, if I had this screen with a coin slot on it, it'd make a lot of money. Yeah. But then you divide 3 minutes for a quarter into $1 million computer, and the math didn't work.
Yeah. Okay.
But I filed it away in the back of my mind, graduated, went to work in industry in Silicon Valley, and one day it looked like the costs were right, and the rest is history.
So that's how Atari and Computer Space and Pong, they were economically viable to go into a commercial. Like what were arcades at that point? Because I've played some of the older pre-video ones, like Ice Cold Beer and stuff like that.
Well, the early games were mechanical nightmares.
Yeah.
They used DC motors, relays. They weren't even solid state, and these moving pieces of film, and they'd project things on a screen. Like there was a game called Speedway, which was a simulated driving game.
Oh, yeah, a car that moves across the light projected on it. Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah. And they'd work for about a day and a half, and then you'd have to fix them again, because they were just complex.
Yeah.
And so I knew that once we got the video game going, that it would be a superior solution.
And so when you look at stuff like that now, obviously it looks just archaic and simple. At the time when Pong was first put out there, what kind of challenge was that to be able to mass produce something like that? Something so simple.
It turned out that was pretty simple to do. You made a circuit board, you bought a TV set, you ripped the tuner out of it and hooked it in directly to the computer, and you were good to go. Then we had a cabinet maker that that built the cabinets, and we'd just essentially assemble them. It was not tricky at all.
Good.
Was it tricky to sell the idea of something like this, though? Like did you encounter resistance from people who said, why would anyone want this? Why should I pay all this money for this thing? How do I know that people are actually going to use it? Or was it seen more like this is something amazing?
Cutting edge.
I have to have this.
Yeah.
The coin-operated game business follows one metric: how much cash is in the cash box at the end of the week. Mm-hmm. It was the early level of analytics, and when we put the first prototype in location, it made so much money that it filled the cash box completely full, and the machine failed.
Wow.
So you couldn't play anymore?
Need a bigger cash box.
Yeah. Need a bigger cash box. That was not a technical hurdle for us.
Make the box bigger.
Make the box bigger.
Very easy.
And so as a result, the word of how much the game earned traveled like wildfire. And so we were sold out before we were in production.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So, yeah, right off the bat. So one guy, we got a bunch of questions from Twitter. A lot of them, people very interested. One guy on a game says, what was the first reaction / feeling you got when you sold your first unit? And he also says, thank you for everything.
I think that when we sold the first unit, I realized how young and dumb I was. that we had no factory.
How old were you at the time?
29.
Okay.
And that it was very atypical. In fact, I was the only executive in my 20s in Silicon Valley. Mm-hmm. And I've often felt that I was sort of the icebreaker that allowed Jobs and Gates and some of the other guys to come along, because I showed that it was possible to have a young idiot be able to run a successful company.
Now it's full of young idiots.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, it's really interesting that you bring up those other names too, because it seems like your like sort of generation was kind of the first guys to have access to a level of advanced computing in high school and college that just sort of spawned all these guys coming out of school that saw the possibilities that the older generation who had actually built these machines
wouldn't necessarily use
they didn't have the sort of long view foresight to know. But yeah, all of a sudden in the late 60s, early 70s, you have all these big tech entrepreneurs that come out of this same very narrow period of time.
Well, I also think video games are the training wheels of computer literacy. I know not a single high-level programmer that is not a gamer. Not one. Mm-hmm. And so I think that there's, that video games and technical prowess are like peanut butter and chocolate. They just go together.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have a question from @Perresident14, Joseph Perez. He wants to know, what effect did you think that your system would have on gaming, and how does it differ from what gaming has evolved into today?
Well, I always felt that we would be constantly evolving the technology till we got to photorealism. Mm-hmm. And then somewhere around the middle 80s, we started talking about these things called virtual reality. And the systems were were clunky, and a guy named Jaron Lanier, who did a lot of the early research on it, I got into a rig and I said, boy, this is going to be really, really cool. Mm-hmm. But the technology was so hard and so expensive and so clunky that I knew that it was kind of at the stage where the big computers were when I was in college. Mm-hmm. And now finally I get so excited about Modal VR, which is my current project, because we can cover a football field with 10 people
crazy.
in VR running around, jumping and playing Pong, or we've got 4 other games, and we're going to be making this available to developers all over the world. And there will be a Modal VR installation coming to your town soon.
So you saw VR's possibilities 25 years early. Like, when you finally saw what was happening in the last, like, 5 years with Palmer Luckey and Oculus, did it finally click for you that this is finally happening, something that you foresaw so long ago?
Not exactly. The early ones that I got into made me sick, and I've always said it's really hard to create an industry based on making your customers sick. You know?
Oh, theme parks.
Yeah, theme parks do a good job.
Well, yeah.
The thrill is there.
When I was working in an amusement park, there was a pecking order on rides that you didn't want to run because you had to constantly clean them up.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that, though, because my first VR experience was in the early 90s at the State Fair, and they had that big rig where you had this huge umbilical cord, and it was about this big on
Right.
your head, and you were inside of a area so that you couldn't, like, fall out of it, I guess. But yeah, I remember it being very, very basic. From what I remember, it being just lines, and you had a sword, and you could walk around and hit stuff like that with it. But I do remember that first experience being extremely sick afterwards, like even stepping out of it then. But it's also, I think now it's a bit easier because it's evolved so much. So your brain has to put less together to make it seem real.
Yeah, well, I've been in our VR construct for over an hour, zero nausea.
Yeah, for me, it's weird. It at this point, I've been using VR stuff somewhat regularly for the last year and a half, 2 years. I get nausea afterwards. I never get it in VR. It's after I get out, and it's sort of like land sickness after you've been on a boat for a week.
Yeah.
I used to do a lot of sailing, and you know what happens when you're sailing is that the sensitivity of your feedback system gets ramped up.
Yeah.
And so when you're back on land, little movements, all of a sudden you say, geez, it's called sea legs.
Yeah.
You know? And, well, when you were playing Pong,
Yeah.
did you have any nausea?
Absolutely not. And I think that's kind of one of the things that makes the room scale and the ability to actually move around inside of it
Helps.
It also connects more of those dots for your brain, so it has less to worry about when it is, because the first time I did it, the first Oculus I did it on, it was still very basic. It was like the DK1, and I don't think I was ready for it, but I think you build a tolerance real fast.
Yeah.
The first time you get it in, it is a little bit shocking.
You have to learn to sort of accept a new sort of sensitivity to the world around you.
But that's what I think Modal
But
VR
still,
does.
latency is a big issue.
Yeah.
As long as, and that's what's interesting about. Have you used the PlayStation VR?
Yes.
So I like what their resolution is lower, but their latency is almost non-existent, and their refresh rate is actually higher than what HTC and Oculus are doing. And I found in the PlayStation VR, even though the tech specs were technically lower, it was a more comfortable experience because of that. So latency, it seems to be the
Big one.
the biggest thing.
And like I said, the Modal VR thing works well because you feel like you're actually in it. You are controlling the movement. Your body's controlling the movement. So when we're playing Pong and running back and forth, you don't think about the fact that you're in a virtual environment.
Exactly.
You just want to hit the fucking ball.
Exactly.
Yeah. You're more worried about getting that damn ball.
Well, I want to live in the Oasis.
Yeah. Yeah. Ready Player One.
And Ready Player One was a very, very fun romp for me.
Yeah.
And when the movie comes out, it's I'm going to be there at midnight.
Do you have any sort of inside track on that project? Have they talked to you at all?
I'm surprised you didn't play the role of the game's creator.
Well, I would have loved that.
Yeah.
But Klein basically cast me as the villain.
Yeah.
Nolan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've never forgiven him for that.
It's a, because we talk about VR so much, and it's one of those things where we've talked about a lot of and I'd like to ask you about this. When it comes down to it, 5 years from now, when the technology's fully fleshed out, where do you see gaming versus social aspects in VR? Because with something like Ready Player One, they created a game out of solving this puzzle, but they are literally living inside of a social environment,
Right.
and doing it that way. And I find a lot of the exciting stuff about VR with social experiences, like the thing that Facebook debuted in the recent Oculus thing, where you can hang out with friends anywhere in the world in the same room. So what do you think about social versus gaming in VR in the future?
I think the human condition is one where we like our games, but we also like our friends. And I'd like to play Go online. And I have some friends in China, and I know how many kids they have and what they do for a living, and I've never met them, but they're my friends, you know, and that's fun. To put them into a VR construct is going to be even better, with one exception. When we're talking about latency, now we come into how many router hops do we?
Yeah, it's an infrastructure issue.
It's an infrastructure issue, and I'm on the board of a company that does, you know, internet normalization, primarily for esports right now, but it's going to be absolutely necessary, and it's called WT Fast. And if you are a gamer, you've got to get into their system. It just makes all the difference, and it's going to be a must-have for VR.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's the thing that I think about is I never think of things in terms of next year or the year after. I'm looking at like 2022 or something like that, where Oculus is in their 4th or 5th phase of hardware and stuff like that. And it seems like, especially with companies that you're on the board of, the problems are being solved currently.
Exactly.
So it's something to look forward to. And it is one of those things where it's like, when you look back at 2001 and 2, people playing Halo on Xbox wasn't always the greatest experience, and you'd have people jumping around and stuff like that. Now it's...
Well, think about Doom.
Yeah,
You know, come on.
Yeah, and now you have, for the most part, unless people are messing around online doing DDoS attacks, you have a pretty seamless experience with a lot of stuff. And I have the same thing as you, where I play games like Battlefield and The Division with people that I've never met in real life, but I know about their kids and stuff like that. And like, hey, how was your day today? How was your job? Like, it's a cool experience, and it's going to be even more exciting to walk into a room and be like, hey, let's sit next to each other on the couch and play Battlefield. And we'll each have our own, like, we'll be looking at the same TV, but you'll have a different view on it or something like that.
There's also the augmented reality riff. And I think that augmented reality is going to control the social board game business in the future. And I've seen some board games that are in augmented reality that are just mind-blowing. I mean, Settlers of Catan in AR.
Yeah.
You know, with your friends.
With animations, is there like...
Oh, yeah. Animations and 3D, and there's a whole class of games that are called hidden personal perspective. And you can do that in AR very nicely. And so you have a shared perspective with your friends, and then you have a hidden personal. Like poker is a great example.
Okay, yeah.
So the cards you have is your hidden personal perspective.
Yeah.
And when you start putting those fundamental game dynamics that have been around, you know, since people have been playing games, and then you add augmented reality to it, it just puts everything on steroids.
Yeah. One game that I'm very excited for that to exist in augmented reality is a game that one of my first experiences with something like that, where the animations created something cool out of a traditional game, was in the 90s, a game called Battle Chess.
Yes.
Where, it was just chess, but when you would take someone's piece over, they would get brutally slaughtered. It was amazing, and I would love to see that in an augmented kind of reality.
You found yourself trading pieces just to see the animations.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you would see how they
wasn't necessarily good chess, but it was good fun.
So it's funny, even it just made me think of, even in the first Star Wars movie, they're playing, when they're on the Millennium Falcon, they're playing a tabletop, hologram 3D game. So this is, I think that's something people have always wanted. And so it'll be nice.
We're going to have it very soon.
Have you found that, because, people say this watching Star Trek and Star Wars and stuff like that, have you found that some of your inspiration throughout your career has come from science fiction in a way that where people see something, they want to create that?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a big fan of science fiction. I probably read one science fiction book a week.
Wow.
Maybe two. And I really want to live there. not the post-apocalyptic ones, but
Have you seen Black Mirror?
oh yeah.
Did you watch the new season?
No, not yet.
oh, God.
I'm going to though.
I'm about halfway in. They definitely show some negative implications of augmented reality and
Specifically
things like
for
that.
you are going to love episode 2 and 4 for all of the right and wrong reasons that it deals with. Episode 2 is very augmented reality based, and episode 4 is where virtual reality and real reality kind of mesh together in a way
fun.
that is beautiful and scary. So get ready for that.
Good technology, in general, is both beautiful and scary.
Mm-hmm.
Any power can be subverted to evil things.
We talk about the internet like that all the time. The internet is the greatest gift to mankind and also one of its biggest vices.
Yeah, and it's the human condition, made more powerful through the tools that we make.
I'm curious, like in 1972, like what were you able to like actually visualize about the possibilities for where something like Pong would go in 30, 40 years? Like, were you able to picture the fully 3D kind of fully HD stuff we have now, or?
Yeah, I could. I always felt that it would keep the pace until we got to photorealism.
Yeah.
And that we would be able to do anything that our minds could imagine, and the technology would support it. This was in the world where we thought that 2K of memory was a lot.
Yeah.
But no, I saw that. The part that was a little bit surprising to me was I didn't ever think that the video game business would get significantly bigger than the movie business. That was just too far out of reach.
Yeah.
But I saw most of the rest of the stuff. It was funny. We were going to do a game network at Atari using telephone lines and modems. And I can remember one conference room conversation where we said, are people going to want to type to each other?
Yeah. Someone just invented the chat room
my
on that
God.
phone call.
Nah.
I don't think it'll
Oh
work.
yeah, there were as many people say, well, people don't type anymore. Girls who are in secretarial school, they type, but guys don't type, and
It's so funny that like one of the most revolutionary ideas that affects everything we do now could be just sort of a
Tossed to the side.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if that would work.
Yeah.
well, that's the problem. That's the problem when you're on the leading edge. You always have, the rule of unintended consequences just clicks in and whacks you on the head every once in a while.
Going off of the the rise of video games and the technology behind it, one of the questions we got from one of our friends, Maddox, he runs a website and has a channel and everything as well. He says he's curious to see what you think of modern remakes of golden era classics like Galaga Legions DX, and I mean there's like that 4-player Pacman game now. What do you think about those kind of recreations?
I love the recreations because one of the things that we did in the early days, since we had such bad graphics, we spent a lot of time getting the timing and the game dynamics right. Most of the games that I see now are not as finely crafted in terms of game dynamics and user interface controls and things like that. Like there's a whole bunch of really wonderful games that are really not very good on a touchscreen.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And so in some ways, doing the old games remastered, if they're able to keep the dynamics of the regular things, these were good games, and they will be good games forever because they are balance, the risk reward, the power ups, all that are really good, as long as you keep the user interface right.
And what was your impression of the rise of, because you just talked about esports a little bit ago, but I mean, even through the 70s and 80s, competitive gaming kind of took off, and
Donkey
we've
Kong,
seen stuff
Pacman.
like the King of Kong and Chasing Ghosts and stuff like that. What was it like to kind of see people? It's not hacking the game, but figuring out the down to the smallest point and pattern how to conquer games that were essentially thought to be unconquerable at one point.
Right. Well, I think that games will always have the Three Sigma players that are way out there on the edge that will deconstruct anything. And I'm not that kind of guy, but I'm always got my hats off to a person that can find a blank spot where you can hover in asteroids and memorize, go left, go right, go left, series of moves that you say, whoa, you can remember that? That's amazing.
You mentioned that you like playing Go, so I'm sure you're aware of the AlphaGo AI sort
Right.
of thing. Like, and that's kind of fits into what you're saying about like mastering the game on this whole separate level where I don't know the game very well, but from what I read, the AI was basically figuring out new strategies that no human had ever like even attempted. It was just using this really kind of obtuse way where basically keeping humans guessing by figuring out everything the human could possibly expect it to do. I'm curious how you feel about that, where a machine is now arguably better than a human at a human-created game.
It's totally predictable. I mean,
We're all doomed.
what? No, you understand
Yeah.
that chess is deterministic. There is a pathway through that cannot be beaten, or at least always, in a tie. I mean, games theory shows you that the person, like in Go, who moves first, should be able to always win. But it's a level of complexity that mere wetware can't deal with, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
It's like, does the best Go player in the world have nuclear weapons? No, it doesn't matter.
To go back into because we played Pong, which I mean is probably one of the most basic things that we could do with the Modal VR technology at this point, and it's going to be evolving in the future. But still staying with kind of a retro game feel to it. Maddox also wanted to know if you ever considered doing a AR Pacman, and I thought that was really an interesting idea because you can do football field-sized stuff. It would almost be interesting to have a hedge maze that's like green
That'd be
screen.
terrifying.
Well, there's actually a Pac-Man that I played that was a first-person perspective, in which you were going through the Pac-Man maze. There was walls, and you were running over dots and the whole thing. Doing that in VR is going to be a slam dunk.
Yeah. Well, I think if we have Sean looking at a top-down view telling us which way to go, it'd be like,
would
there's a
help.
ghost coming right behind you. Run now.
Boy, in the 80s, I did a exercise bike in which you play Pong, and it was top down view.
Yeah.
But when a ghost was after you, you had to pedal faster.
Yeah, that'd be
That's genius.
terrifying. Yeah.
Gets you in shape.
Like what is I would say like if you had in the same time frame that I was talking about earlier, maybe like a 5-year window to develop something. 5 years from now, what do you think will be something you'll want to debut if you have enough power behind it? Like
Haptics.
a haptic suit, like in Ready Player One?
Yeah. Haptics are the next big problem because you really want to either have this jack-in point at the back of your neck or...
I don't know, it's terrifying.
That is
You've seen like
terrifying.
Ghost in the Shell and stuff like that,
Oh,
of
yeah,
course,
I
right?
mean, in Matrix.
It's easier to just take over the nervous system than build the whole suit.
Well, there's actually some interesting debate going on as to what that is, but I think there's a couple of things that I've seen in which you can fool the nervous system with clues, so it's not full haptic suit,
I'm
but
terrified of this already.
but you can give the impression that you're accelerating, give the impression that you're getting hit on the left hand. I did an experiment one time in which I thought I would use acoustics. And I thought if I had enough speakers around a room that I could time, sound goes blindingly slow. And so by just hitting a whole bunch of bass speakers, I could create a pressure wave that would sort of hit you on the shoulder. Mm-hmm. And then I realized that the amount of energy that we were putting, that if I missed and hit your ear, I would make you deaf.
Yeah.
And I thought that's probably not a good idea.
No. This is well beyond, and this is treading into sci-fi territory, but at some point in the future, do you think that it may be possible to download consciousness?
Singularity?
Yeah.
I think that's going to be very hard because we're not ROM. Mm-hmm. And we are, a lot of people believe that our memories and everything are actually stored in the wave construct. I never say never and always avoid always.
But if someone used, it's hard for me to put it into words because it is such an out there concept, but the idea that in the same way you could trick the body into thinking that it's being hit by something or tapped, tricking a mind into memories that
like Total Recall sort of thing.
This really climbs into the area of, is there a soul?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That is separate from. And if you look at the India mystics, mm-hmm. It's really, they're absolutely convinced that there is a soul that is separate from the mind, that the brain is actually the wetware of a more important construct. And so whenever you get into the metaphysics, I feel like that's more for philosophy than technology.
Exactly. Well, sorry to get you into that point, but it is.
No,
it
it's
is,
okay.
It is very interesting. It's
fun
to think about the fact that you, at least your memories, if you programmed them into something, could be relived.
Yeah, well,
not your soul, but
this comes into the whole issue of free will versus determinism. Mm-hmm. Because if you can recreate a state of your brain, you should be able to predict the next instance and the next instance, which implies determinism. Mm-hmm. But then you get into quantum mechanics, and it says, no, there's a whole bunch of random stuff going on that will automatically give the potential of free will. Because if there is a soul, you clearly climb out of the construct of deterministic, end state machines.
Yeah.
Anyway,
let's lighten it up. What do you think about the Atari ET landfill?
Ah, yes.
We had two people submit that, at Faux Garrett and at Irvine FTW. The ET game, the ET extraterrestrial.
Well,
game
there's the urban
controversy.
legend, and then there's the reality.
The reality,
that
yeah.
The Xbox people dug up. They actually dug it up back in 2012, I think.
Well, understand that this was after I left Atari.
Yeah.
And Atari did a bunch of really stupid things after I left. Mm-hmm. Not that I wouldn't have done different. I would have done equally stupid things, but just different ones.
Yeah.
But they basically I've always said Atari committed suicide. It wasn't homicide. Mm-hmm. And they didn't innovate when they should have. And as a result, they started thinking that they were in the record business, not in the technology business. And so they tried to push the 2600 1 or 2 years too long. Mm. And they thought that software was going to be forever in this really, really crappy thing. The Atari VCS had 128 bytes of memory. That was really clunky.
Yeah.
And so they licensed E.T. from Spielberg at such a high number that in order to make the math work, they had to build a whole bunch of cartridges. And they signed the deal like in late August, and so and all the cartridges had to ship middle November. And this was, it was a fail the minute they signed that contract.
Yeah.
It had no chance of being rational. And that led to, of course, the meltdown in 83 and the cartridge landfill.
Yeah. And what did you think? There's someone that actually asked directly about that at TN Gamer. Do you think gaming was dead after the video game crash of 83? And I guess to go off of that, like, what ramifications did that have on the industry as a whole in the short and long term? Because shortly after that came Nintendo, which was the biggest thing that ever hit home video games for my generation. I remember having a Nintendo, and I mean, I'm sure that you had one as well.
Yeah.
Well, in the history of American business, it's the only time that the market leader abandoned their industry.
Wow.
Stupid. And to think that the video game business was over when in fact it was totally misdiagnosed. It was a marketing blunder of epic proportions. The business imploded because nobody wanted to play. I mean, there was a saturation. Nobody wanted to play those crappy games anymore. And so the door was left wide open to somebody who was willing to innovate. And the Nintendo Famicom was just good enough of the next generation stuff. And I might add, did you know that the Japanese game market, which was very divorced from the American game market, actually started not with Pong, but with Breakout?
Which is, it's Pong against no one, right? It's a
Exactly.
brick breaker.
Because in Japan, it wasn't normal to have your friends over.
It was less social and
social and
yeah.
Which is funny because arcades there are still going so strong.
Oh, it's incredible.
Yeah. Well, see, that's a social thing. You go out, you have fun with your friends out, and that's what karaoke drives.
Yeah.
People go out to do karaoke with their friends.
What do you think about video games being, I mean, it's been a home console long before arcades died, but I mean, the last, I think mid to late 90s was when arcades just started disappearing in mass, and now you have a resurgence of
retro arcades.
Nostalgia driving the resurgence of arcades. We have in LA alone, we have 3 or 4 that are open where they're bars and
restaurants,
they have and they have that. And what did you think about when everything went straight to home? There was no going out and socializing. It was all at home, but it was also because you could have an arcade experience at home. The graphics were there.
Play online.
And then in 99, 2000, with the home consoles, you could start playing online. Computers, it was earlier.
It was very predictable because the home experience was cheaper and was in fact a better experience at home than it was standing in front of an arcade machine.
Going down
quarters.
there to, yeah.
There was a second thing that happened. The coin-op games got very complex. The follow-on feature, the complexity lost the casual gamer. They got very violent. That lost the female gamer.
Mortal Kombat and fighting games, yeah.
So the arcade devolved into a testosterone-laden, teenage male hangout.
Yeah.
And in general, teenage boys are considered by most societies to be unacceptable.
Yeah, we're pretty terrible.
Well, no. What happens is that there are about 2% of teenage boys that are totally, they're totally bad guys, and that's why you never see teenage social clubs that are built for profit, because they all get closed down because the police have to keep showing up.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Well, now you have a bunch of 30-somethings running around, running back to the arcade
Yeah.
to relive the magic that they felt.
Exactly, and they're good games, and that's going to be augmented into the VR space as well.
They have was about a month or two ago, they released a retro arcade in VR where you could use ROMs in the standard cabinets and play whatever game you want.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
you walk up to it in VR and start playing it, and that's another like
Well, my number 2 son has a
number 2.
I have 8 kids.
Oh, okay. I thought you were ranking them, not in order of birth.
No, it's my oldest son is actually doing a massive. Think of it as a Dave and Buster's with new tech.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's going to be wonderful, and his company is 2-Bit Circus. But Tyler,
Write that down so I can invest in it.
but Tyler is doing a thing called the Polycade, which he's taking ROMs and all the old classic games into a cabinet with the right controllers and everything for your home.
Wow.
And he did a Kickstarter and did well, and he's taking orders, and you have to buy several. And then my youngest son is doing some game systems for VR, and my other son is doing a couple of mobile games.
So
right
your whole
now.
family is
gaming.
is in the
They
gaming business.
They all wanted to deny their father for a while, and then they said, "Geez, I know more about the game business just from dinner table conversation."
Yeah.
And so when they got serious about making money, they said, "Okay, done.
Yeah.
I'm in the game business."
It was
Since we're kind of running out of time here, I want to hear about what is right around the corner for Modal VR and the stuff that you're working on. Like, what we experienced is very cool, but we're excited to see more. What can we expect that you can actually talk about in 2017?
We've got a game called Mythic Combat, which is superheroes standing on top of skyscrapers throwing plasma balls and lightning at each other, where you have to run and dodge and charge up and do all kinds of fun stuff. And that's a bigger workout than Pong. I mean, it's I came out of that involvement and I was just sweating like a pig. In fact, I think I lost because I just got too tired. I mean, I'm getting older. I'm still a wily guy, but every once in a while, age does have its benefits or
Detriment.
curses. But I think that the next big thing that you're going to love about Modal VR is getting into a construct with 10 of your best friends. That's going to be really fun. And you can see each other and you can interact and you can do team sports and various things. We're playing around with putting a football helmet with VR so that we can run plays and things like that.
So when and where will your average consumer be able to start using Modal VR's technology?
In a mall in 8 months to a year.
Okay.
So you're going to save physical activity and malls from extinction.
Yes.
Good. I like that plan.
Or a parking lot.
Yeah.
I mean, we think that the top floor of a lot of parking garages will become Modal VR constructs that will add new life to parking garages.
That's
Well,
very
this
cool.
is very exciting.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us today. Very interesting story.
Good
and,
fun.
Believe me, we're just as excited as you as the future of VR and AR. And I mean, obviously, you're way more excited because you have the talents to actually do something about it. But we like the actual experience, so it's fun.
Well, the most important thing is to make the future happen sooner.
Yeah. You're doing a great job. And you've been doing a great job for longer than I've been alive. So thank you very much. Cool.
Hey, look on the screen. Here's where you can click on stuff and see more of what we do. First off, there's a subscribe button right down there in the lower left. Make sure to click that first.
Then check out these 2 recent videos that we know you're gonna love. And then gaze at this amazing fan art that was submitted to us via Twitter. Submit your fan art today by sending it to any of our Twitter accounts. Click everything, it's fun.
Do it.